There are all sorts of benefits for providing job security for people. There's downsides to it as well. I won't lie to you about that, because when we say we will make sure you always have a job here, when you're in an economic situation, that then becomes a violation of that promise, and that becomes an issue. And we saw this in the 80s with AT&T and IBM that had no layoff policies for years. They had job security for people. No one seemed to have any concerns about it until they stopped being able to compete and they had economic problems, in which case then they had to turn around and lay people off. And that created a violation of trust between people. So the best option here is to make sure we do good workforce planning and that we stay on top of strategic issues, we stay on top of performance-based issues, we address concerns in the company and underperforming divisions, and we give them our attention rather than letting them just go by the wayside and then deciding to lay people off as a last resort. Having a zero layoff policy can be a good thing for the organization because it provides the job security, but it can hamper your hands. Your hands are then tied if you have an economic issue, a legitimate issue that you've tried to address, and then suddenly laying people off feels like a violation of that trust. So it's okay to do a layoff as long as we have exhausted all other options before we do that layoff. There are a number of different ways that we can make layoff decisions. One can be based on seniority. The last in is the first out. So if you're the last person hired, you're more likely to be the first person let go. And it's kind of like the accounting method, right? For inventory, LIFO, FIFO, whatever. But we use a LIFO method for dealing with layoff decisions based on seniority. Last in, first out. We can also do it in the reverse way, not quite a layoff, but we can offer early retirement for people. And offering early retirement will give people the right to take an early retirement offer if they want to. You can't force people into early retirement based on laws, particularly ADEA laws and things like that. But we can offer early retirement with a particular offer and have it targeted and a certain amount of money they can expect from doing that early retirement. So that's also a seniority-based approach. The last one is performance-based, and this is probably the most difficult to do simply because we don't always have really good measures of performance in our organization. Organizations that don't stay on top of doing job descriptions, or organizations that have a really poorly managed, designed and managed performance appraisal system don't have really good, solid performance criteria in order to be able to make that decision. So it is important that we do the work before we have to do a layoff to make sure we've got good performance criteria and that we have a good, honest assessment of performance so that when we have to do a layoff and it's based on the poorest performers, we've got some legitimate data that we can work off of to do that. There are some laws that are attached to the concepts of turnover. We've already talked about employment at will with respect to dismissals. When we are actually doing layoffs, the WARN Act is an important law. It requires us to give 60 days written notice and provide 60 days of pay instead of notice, or pay instead of notice. So I can let people go tomorrow, but I still have to give them at least minimally 60 days notice. And it's workforces of a certain size and things like that. We just need to make sure that we are compliant with EEOC laws. For example, not letting somebody go simply because they filed a grievance against a company or made a complaint about sexual harassment or things like of that nature. The WARN Act basically covers employers with at least 100 full-time employees or 100 part-time and full-time combined that work 4,000 hours. So, larger companies are obligated to do the WARN Act and engage in the WARN Act and give people the notice. Smaller companies that have under 100 people are not obligated to do that. It doesn't mean that you still shouldn't do the right thing by your people, giving them advance notice or making sure minimally they're getting their 60 days pay, but that helps. Like 2 months is a fairly common severance when people are let go, whether it's because of the WARN Act that requires them to pay that, or whether it is, severance above and beyond that. But just making sure when you're making your layoff decisions, we're not violating employment laws. It's really important. Like other kinds of dismissals, when you're doing a layoff message to people, it's really hard. It needs to be done in person. It needs to be done professionally and with compassion because you're communicating to people, we no longer need your work. We appreciate what you've done, but because of financial situations, we are letting people go and you are going to be let go. So it is important that HR has really clear messaging that they engage in, and that they are training managers also how to engage in that messaging. How do we deliver bad news? How do we remain empathetic? How do we not escalate emotions? All of these things are really important part of delivering that message to people. You've heard me mention severance pay a few times, and severance pay is not a legal requirement except under the WARN Act if we are letting people go immediately instead of giving them 60 days notice. Then we would give them minimally those 60 days, we would give them the 60 days of pay as a form of severance. But really, it's just a payroll substitution, right? Instead of warning them in advance, you pay them in advance. But a severance is what we pay to our departing employees. Again, it's not a requirement. Not every company does that. Is it the right thing to do? Sure, but we are not legally obligated to do it. And it does, as it says in your PowerPoint here, it softens the blow a little bit. To at least I know if I'm getting 3 months severance or 4 months severance or severance based on how long I've worked for the company. And if I've worked for the company for 20 years, I'm going to probably get a larger severance pay. And it enables me to have some money to live off of or squirrel away in savings until I can find another job. Um, and people definitely use that money to live off of. Unemployment works, but unemployment is not going to replace all of the money that you would normally get in your paycheck. It's only a proportion of it. Make sure you can, put food on the table and that kind of thing. Um, so it does help temper things a little bit. Sometimes companies will say, I will give you a severance in exchange that you don't sue me. Now, if there are some legal concerns, I would say walk away from the severance and sue because you are very likely going to end up with a larger settlement than you would if you had just signed the severance and let it go. But if there's no legitimate reason for you to sue, then you will, obviously signing the waiver is not a big deal. I did have a colleague when I was laid off from a business a bunch of years ago before I went back for my MBA. Um, my colleague had a contract, and the contract had the terms in which what the separation would be. And he turned around when they said, we're going to lay you off, and this is how much money people are going to get. He's like, oh no, I have a contract, and this is what my contract says, and this is what you're going to pay me, and this is what it's going to look like. And they were like, oops, okay. So he wasn't going to sign anything, um, you know, um, until he made sure that they accommodated him appropriately. He would have sued if they had not done what they were supposed to do based on the contract. And he got fortunate. He never had to deal with that. But that's obviously things to consider. But 2 months is fairly common. Sometimes it's more. Sometimes it varies based on seniority. Sometimes it's a minimum of a month if you've only just started working there, and it goes up proportionately based on how many years you've worked. Just every company has their own formula, and there's no right or wrong way to manage it because there's no legal obligation to do it. Anything the company does is just, it's extra. Some things that an organization can do is offer outplacement service, which is basically helping people to find another job. So it will help them to rebuild a resume, and it will help them to get extra training or learn new skills to make them more marketable. It might connect them with employers and who are hiring, or employment agencies who will help people to find jobs. But that's the job of the outplacement service, is to help people to make that transition. It's not somebody internal. It's usually somebody external to the company, where the company pays a fee to them to help manage people in those transitions to increase the likelihood they can find another job. Um, and it shows that you care about your people, that despite the fact that we have to do layoffs, you are not ungrateful for their efforts, and that you want to do everything you can to help them land on their feet properly. And then going back to survivors again, we want to make sure that we are helping them to feel secure, that they're not going to lose their job next week. We need to be honest with people about the reasons why this happened and what the impact is going to be on them, because it's going to end up being, probably you're going to have to do more with less. So people need to know that and need to be aware of that. Lastly, let's wrap up this section on separation and retention issues by talking about engagement. And an engaged workforce is one that is much more productive. They are more likely to have customers who are more satisfied, because the employees are more engaged in making sure that the customers are getting what they need. There's greater profitability because people are working harder, more productive, and more efficient in what they do. And they're less likely to leave, which means we're not losing human capital, we're not losing knowledge, we're retaining that. An engaged workforce is going to be a high-performing workforce because they care, they're engaged, they want to do the right things no matter what. A Gallup survey was done somewhere in the 20 teens, I think 2016, if I'm not mistaken, that said only 26% of our workforce are actively engaged, which is only a fourth of our people. So you look at your organization, you've got 100 people, 25 or 26 of them are the ones working really hard, and they're really engaged, and they're doing all the things, and they're staying late and putting in the time and the effort to make things work. Then you've got 55%, right, that are not really engaged. They're like, yeah, whatever. I don't care. I'm not showing up to work. I'm calling in sick more often. I'm absent more often. I'm leaving early and arriving late. And then you have another 19, almost 20%, that are actively disengaged. Now, the 55% that are not engaged are not trying to sabotage the company. They're not trying to harm the company. They're just checked out, psychologically and physically. The 19%, though, that are actively disengaged are more likely to engage in sabotage, to do the wrong thing intentionally. There's more intentionality in their disengagement. They are purposefully disengaged and purposefully doing what they can to undermine the company. So, you're dealing with a fifth of your organization that really is not doing what they should be doing, and are actually actively harming you. Another half are, they're kind of checked out. They're doing the minimum, but they're not going above and beyond that. But only a fourth of them are really, truly engaged. And it's so important for us to figure out how to address those issues. And good news is this, there are ways to address these issues. It's hard to measure engagement directly, but what we can do is look at the drivers of engagement. And the drivers of engagement are the things that we need to see in organizations in order for our workers to assess the situation and make a determination that they are engaged and choose to be engaged. The drivers of engagement include the following. There are 7 management drivers of engagement. Number 1 is pride in the organization. The organization needs to behave in such a way that people are proud to work for that company. So if you're a company that engages in illegal or unethical behaviors, or you have a poor reputation as an employer, I'm not going to be proud of this company. I'm not going to recommend the company to buy our products. I'm not going to recommend people to work for me. I'm going to do the bare minimum to keep the job that I have because I need to pay my bills, but I'm not going to go above and beyond. So if I'm not proud of my company and I'm not doing things to make people proud, then um, we are going to more likely see a disengaged workforce. The next item is making sure people know and understand the significance of their job and how it links to the corporate strategy. So this goes back to the stuff we talked about in the first module about the importance of a strategic vision and strategic linkages and understanding why my job matters in the big picture. We need to make sure people understand this information because significance and linkage is a foundation for intrinsic motivation. And when people feel like they have a significant job, that it's linked to a corporate strategy, and that their job is really important for these reasons, they are far more likely to feel like they have high levels of intrinsic motivation, which then drives them to be more engaged. We need to make sure we have a good fit. Now, we've already talked about fit a little bit with respect to retention/turnover, and it matters for engagement. If I am in a position where I have a bad fit, that it was a poor hire, that you wanted me to do something, but you lied to me, and it was really a very different job than what you told me it was going to be. And I've had that circumstance happen to me on multiple occasions. I was told, you don't have to be on call, but yet I was on call every weekend. I would never have taken the job if I had to be on call every weekend. We need to make sure we have job fit in terms of the skills needed and also job fit in terms of getting along with the culture and making sure I fit into the culture. So doing a good job in the hiring process is important to make sure that we have somebody who's going to be a good fit and will work hard for us in the company. Trust, integrity, and credibility. If the managers and the leaders in the company are not trustworthy, they don't have integrity, they engage in unethical behaviors, they aren't credible, they lie to you all the time, no one is going to trust. And if no one's going to trust, then they're not going to put their effort out to be high-performing workers. They're probably going to disengage and be not perform as well. And so, again, they'll be disengaged and low performers. You need to have a supportive culture where someone has your back, that when you're struggling with something, you know that there's a culture there that's going to help you to be successful. Emotional connection, feeling connected to people in the company. It requires some vulnerability, but it requires us to know that I get along interpersonally with others and that there is a connection with other people, that we are a unit and we are working together as a unit to perform well for the company. So having that emotional connection for our employees will increase the likelihood that they will be engaged and have high intrinsic motivation. And the same thing with development. We need to invest in our employees to make sure that they know we care. They know that we want them to have more skill, and we want them to work for us for a long time. And when we do that, that improves employee development tremendously, and that improves engagement in turn.